If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, what is the absolute creepiest thing that has happened to you that you can't tell anyone because they wouldn't believe you? When I was maybe 6 to 7, we were visiting family in New Orleans. I was sleeping in a strange room, strange bed, so I was having trouble getting to sleep. I heard a tapping on the window, softly. Tap tap tap, pause, tap tap tap. I looked at the window and I thought I saw something move that looked like a brimmed hat. It was a split-level home, so whomever it was would have had to have been tall. I woke up my parents and they told me the house was old with wooden floors that creak, and I was imagining things, so go back to bed. In the morning, we found the back gate lock was broken. I got married too young, 21, and then divorced when I was 23. A few months went by and I started having these nightmares. Long story short, a girl in a white dress with brown hair matted with leaves and dirt walks into my house, tracking muddy footprints. She stops and stares at the attic stairs, which are down for some reason. I ask her why she's there, she screams and the whole house crumbles. I never saw her face. I had this nightmare almost every night for 3 months, and when I say almost every night, I mean probably 95% of the time. For some reason I started sleeping in my living room as opposed to the bedroom. I just wasn't very comfortable in there. So I'm sleeping on my couch one night and wake up around 2 a.m. for no reason. I check my phone and see I have a text from my friend and respond, important because it verifies I was awake. I started getting very uncomfortable, and then I heard a knock at my door. I walk around and peek out the window and there's a girl there. I can't see anything other than her white hoodie, which is up, and long dark hair coming out of it. She knocks, then knocks again. Not urgently or anything, but she didn't appear intent on leaving. So, stupidly, in retrospect, looking back on this as a 34-year-old, I crack open the door. In a quiet voice, she asks if she can use my cell. I still can't really see her face because my porch light was out and I'd been putting off changing the bulb for no reason at all. I ask if everything's okay, and she just repeats she needs to use the phone. Again, against my better judgment, I put my cell phone to the dial screen, and hand it to her. I see her hit a few things, then out the phone to her ear, and the screen light gave me a better view of her face. She was younger, somewhere between 18 to 22. Plain, not really particularly distinguishing in any way. She waits for a minute, then says, "Hey, I need help." "I need your help." "Yeah. Okay." Then hands me the phone again. So I look at my phone and it's still on the dial screen. Something felt weird to me, so I clicked over to the recent calls and she hadn't called anyone. When I looked up, she was gone. Not quite vanished. But like way down the street, farther than anyone should have been able to cover in that time frame, walking away. After that, the nightmares stopped. Potentially related, 2 months later I got a call from a friend late at night, maybe around 10 p.m., who was like, "Hey, wanna come over for a beer?" I wasn't doing anything, so I did. I got back about 1 a.m., and my house had been broken into. Totally trashed, with a bunch of valuables gone. Certainly don't think my friend had anything to do with that, but I do sometimes wonder if that girl was casing my house that night. It's the only correlation I can make between the dream stopping and real-world explanations for that weird experience. The whole thing was just super weird. When I was a child, I was running around the house. I think I was home alone. My mom had run next door to the neighbor. My dad was at work. I heard the door open and close. "Mom?" No answer. I heard footsteps downstairs that were too heavy for my mom. I freaked out and decided I needed to hide. I was next to the laundry room, so I ran in there, and buried myself in a pile of dirty clothes. The footsteps came up the stairs. I heard the footsteps go down the hallway to my sister's bedroom, then mine, then my parents' room. Then the steps came to the laundry room. I heard heavy breathing. They stood there. It felt like forever. Then they left. I heard the front door open and close again. But I was paralyzed in fear. I stayed there, under the dirty clothes, until my mother came home and called my name. She thought it was all in my head when I told her what happened. The church that my family attends does this thing every few years or so where the youth hike a certain amount of miles, usually 20 within the span of a couple days. We had to dress in pioneer clothes and pull wagons in the summer heat. Everything was fine the first night since we were all tired, but the second night we had gotten used to the walking and all the weight we had to pull, so when it came time for bed, my friend and I weren't tired. We had all set up these tents that were on top of this loud plastic tarp. That night, my friend and I left our tent to watch the stars and see how many shooting stars we could count. We were talking, and there was a couple horses that a few leaders rode that weren't far from us. There was this thing running around in circles around us, and since it was so dark we had assumed it was a horse. Eventually we had changed positions so that we could see a little bit, thanks to the moon, and I was talking about something when I see something out of the corner of my eye. About 15 feet away from us was another tent, but there was a shadow that ducked down as soon as I saw it. I had paused and my friend had asked, "Did you see that too?" There was silence, and then we both jumped up and grabbed our blankets and ran back to our tent. Whatever we saw was large and clearly ducking down so that it was hidden from the tent. These tents were about 10 feet tall. We knew it wasn't someone since the tallest person was about 6'4", and the tent still had height on him. Plus, we never heard the tarp rustle if someone had gotten up and just so happened to be taller than the tent. We stumbled back to our tent and tied it shut in a hurry, and soon we heard it run in our direction, stop outside our tent and stay there, waiting for us to come back out. We held our breath out of fear and ended passing out. No one believed what we saw and said it was just a leader or another youth. Whatever we saw out there, we know it ran in circles around us for a bit, and watched us for God knows how long. It also had a weird football-shaped head and insanely large arms. As a child, I'd spend weekends at my dad's house, which was old and said to be haunted by a playful girl named Esther. For other people, doors would shut themselves, lights would turn on and off, and doorbells would ring in the middle of the night. My siblings would even have conversations with Esther. Understanding this as a 6-year-old absolutely terrified me. Pretty soon I had my own experiences, but they were less friendly. I'd hear breathing in the dark, I'd stop breathing to listen, and it was much closer to me than my stepbrother in the bunk above me. I'd awake to the imprint of someone sitting on the end of the bed, breathing. Reading others' stories of sleep paralysis sound familiar to my experience, but one night I challenged my night terror. I had 2 die-cast race cars on my dresser. Both hoods opened on the cars, but one didn't stay up very well. I said out loud, "If you're here, shut the hood," when I go to bed, and opened the hood of the car that had the better functioning hood. I stared at it to make sure it was up and stayed up. I hit the lights, and as soon as I laid down, slam. I turned the lights on, the hood was closed. I ran downstairs. My stepmother said I looked white as a sheet, like I'd seen a ghost. She and my dad checked it out and came to the conclusion that it just shut on its own. The weirdness continued until they moved out, but I still have trouble believing it myself, or typing it out. Years ago, me and my cousin hung out a lot, drinking and smoking and playing video games. He lived in the last house on the right down a dead-end road in an area where it was somewhat suburban and also somewhat country. He had a river right behind his house, and it wasn't huge or anything, but it had a decent current. On the other side of this river there is a small island and a river on the other side of the island. It's kind of shaped like a triangle. So he calls me one day and tells me I have to come over to hang out because he was scared. Asked him what happened, and he told me his dog started freaking out the night before by growling and snarling and barking. Usually this dog was dead silent unless she had to go out, then she would whine a little bit. He said he kept hearing splashing while he was outside, like someone throwing rocks into the water, and before the splashing his dog started freaking out. So I go over there, we are hanging outside out back smoking a cigarette and shooting the shit. His dog started sniffing around like crazy and then looks at the island and starts going nuts. Me and him turn on our phones' flashlights and start checking out the island to see if we could see anything. We're scanning the island back and forth and we both go, "Bro, do you see that? Big ass pair of red eyes staring at us. I remember we just froze and shit bricks, like WTF is that?" So the island is pretty much the same level as his backyard, and these eyes were at like a 4 to 5 foot level. We proceeded to watch these eyes raise to about 8 or 9 feet above the ground, and both of us got nervous, like, is it a ducking bear? What is this thing? The eyes then just vanished and we heard this thing move around the island, heavily. His dog starts whimpering and whining. Out of nowhere huge rocks started getting thrown at us, like big ass stones the size of small pumpkins start hitting the water, and for the next hour and a half we heard this thing move back and forth through the trees and throwing things into the water. Then it just stopped and it went silent. I must mention that this house is old as shit and we are pretty sure it's haunted because it constantly sounds like someone slamming doors and stomping around the house when it would be just me and him and the doors would be locked. We also heard faint talking when there would be no one else in this house. To this day we don't know what it was. We initially thought it was a bear because there were a few bear sightings in the area, but how would a bear throw mini boulders into the water like that? There was no bear sounds either. It was completely silent out that night, with no birds, no frogs, no crickets, etc. One night when I was 15 I stayed over at my buddy's house. His parents were gone and his older brother was looking after us. When we went to bed the house was quiet and dark. I could barely see his bedroom door open slightly and I assumed it was my buddy's brother checking in on us, but then I realized that this person looking in on us was wearing glasses and my friend's brother did not. There was no one else in the house and I could not figure out who this person was. I was frozen in fear just staring at this figure looking in on us when my buddy, who was in another bed on the other side of the room, started screaming at the top of his lungs. I had never heard a more terrifying sound and my heart just dropped out of my chest. The person looking at us quickly backed out and the door was closed quietly. A few seconds later we saw the light come on the hallway and my friend's brother flew open the door asking what was wrong. We both started yelling that someone was just here. The brother grabbed a baseball bat from his room and started searching the house. We checked the front and back doors and the garage but they were all locked. All the windows were closed. He looked in every closet and under the beds. Needless to say we spent the rest of the night in his room. None of us could sleep so we just stayed up all night talking. It was one of the most terrifying but also best nights of my life. It was 1976. I was a student at a Bible college in South Carolina. I was 20. So was my friend. It was a couple of years after The Exorcist movie came out and there were many people in the charismatic church movement who were practicing exorcism or deliverance, as the church people like to call it. There was a couple I knew who thought they were Ed and Lorraine Warren. They had performed an exorcism on me. At the time, people in the church were saying lots of us were demonically oppressed, not actually possessed. This experience was really creepy because I went into a state, now I think it was a type of hypnotism, where my body was given over to some force that made me thrash around and scream as though I had no control. However, that's another story. The story I'm about to write is about another girl and I who decided to deliver her from her own demonic oppression. I believed I could perform it because I had experienced it. Her name was Loretta. We were roommates in the girls' housing of the school. It was an old house about 70 years old. We were in the kitchen at the table. It was about 2 or 3 in the afternoon. In South Carolina near the coast in the summer, they often have afternoon tropical storms that blow in suddenly and have torrential rain that can last an hour or more. They sometimes have as much as 10 inches of rain in that time and the winds can get up to about 80 miles an hour. Loretta had asked me to cast a spirit of fear out of her. I started reading Bible verses about fear and I looked up at Loretta and it looked as though spirals were coming out of her eyes. I thought there was something wrong with my eyes, so I didn't say anything. I read another verse and spoke to the spirit of fear in her. I rebuked it in the name of Jesus. When I did that, it was as if all hell broke loose. A spiral started coming out of her eyes and it grew to about the size of the room. Loretta and I both started screaming. It looked to me as though a force was pulling Loretta's chair away from the table. She grasped the table and was holding on for dear life, all the while screaming bloody murder. The sky outside the window turned pitch dark and the wind started blowing about 80 miles an hour. It rattled the windows. Then the wind was inside the kitchen with us and it felt as though Loretta was going to be sucked into some kind of vortex. Whatever the force was, it felt like the most evil power I had ever encountered. We were both scared out of our wits. Loretta was holding onto the table with all her might and I managed to get out of my chair and as far as the doorway of the kitchen, but I couldn't get past the threshold. I was stuck there, trying to escape but not able to move past that doorway. I was yelling, "I plead the blood of Jesus. I rebuke you in Jesus' name." And anything else I could remember preachers saying. Nothing seemed to faze this force. I started doubting the whole power in the blood and the power of Jesus' name. Then, as abruptly as it started, it stopped. There was no wind, no evil presence, even the wind outside stopped and the sun was shining again. She and I both ran out of the house and in separate directions and found our friends and told them what happened. We were both afraid to go back into the house. I don't know where Loretta went that day, but I stayed over at a friend's house. Loretta moved away and I never spoke to her again. That's how frightening our experience was. We couldn't stand to even see each other again. Our friends believed us because that's the sort of atmosphere we were in. Everybody believed in demons and angels. I don't believe any of that anymore, but I can't explain what happened that day. About 40 years later, I found Loretta on Facebook and messaged her, asking her if she remembered it. I wanted her to corroborate my story, because the few people I told this to, actually just my son and daughter, think I don't remember it right. But Loretta said she remembered and she recalled it just the way I related it here. The difference is that Loretta still believes that stuff. She believes we experienced a demon and she still believes God has a purpose for her. This summer my 17 daughter was working a late night shift. It was a little after midnight when I left to pick her up. When I stepped outside it was eerily silent. You couldn't hear the frogs, insects, nothing. I stood there just waiting to hear them again, but I had this awful feeling something was watching me. I got in the car and just shook off the weird feelings and turned the radio up loud to distract myself. So I start driving down the road with my brights on, have many deers in the area, and make a right-hand turn onto another road. Making the turn, my headlights caught a glimpse of something. It was black, quick, and jumped from the roadway onto the side of a steep hill on the opposite side. I was scared at this moment. I was afraid to drive past this area. For the remaining drive, I kept trying to rationalize what I had just seen. Was it a deer, some animal, maybe an alien? The possibilities were endless, but I had never seen anything like it. When we made it home, the nightlife noises were back and thriving. There was no eerie feeling that something was lurking nearby. A couple weeks had passed and I had spoken with a neighbor that lives 10 minutes away. We live way out in the county, and she said some weird things have been happening around here. I thought she meant maybe a thief or coyotes that were around. Then she said, "You might think I'm crazy, but..." She goes on to tell me about how silent it would get at night more often, and there was some dark figure that they had seen. Not just her, but also a few other people that live nearby. So I tell her of my ordeal of the night I had experienced. I told her it was hard to explain exactly what I had seen because I'd never seen anything else like it. She asked me, "Did it look like a Dementor from Harry Potter?" Oh goodness. Yes. She tells me her sister-in-law was out visiting and left after it was dark to go home. Driving close to the area where my house is located, my neighbor gets a call from her sister-in-law that's screaming and hysterically crying. They drove to where she was and she was too scared to even open the car door. Eventually she is able to tell them she's seen something black crouching over in the roadway. She slows down and is being cautious, but this black figure stands up and jumps to the nearest tree and climbs up it so fast and disappears. She was so shaken up that they had to drive her home. It never happened again. I haven't heard any other stories of this from my few neighbors. I will forever be cautious when it goes silent on a hot summer's night. Who can I even share this with other than a few close neighbors that had also seen this mysterious black figure? If I told anyone, then they'd think I was crazy. Winters are usually silent here, and I hope whatever this thing was moved on or at least hibernating all winter. I'll never forget it, the day after Easter in 1972. We were off from school. To this day I have no explanation. When I was 15, my older brother and I were hanging out in the yard. Our dad was a very unique person. We lived in a rural area. To our surprise, we both saw Dad walking up the long driveway to our house. This was around 10 in the morning. We wondered what happened as he left for work in his car around 7. My brother went inside to tell Mom. We were curious. He was wearing the same clothes he wore that morning. It was him, no way it could be anyone else, and the closest houses were at least a quarter mile away. I started to walk out to meet him, and as I was maybe 100 feet away I called out. Next thing I knew, he wasn't there. I thought he somehow fell into the culvert. Nothing. I searched, my brother came and also searched. Mom and my sister came out and we covered the area for maybe half an hour. Nothing. Mom suggested we give Dad a call at work. He answered the phone right away, and Mom in a light-hearted manner asked him if he'd been home in the last hour. He worked as a civilian on a military post about 25 miles away. Mom put my brother on the phone and then me. He denied he'd been home. We again asked him when he came home and he seemed to be irked. Insisted we were mistaken and he had no explanation. I remember about 10 years later bringing this up and he became upset and said I was playing a mind game. I'm the only person in this account who's still alive. To this day I have no idea what my brother and I experienced. I know it was him. I know he was there, and then he wasn't. I guess it's just one of those things. Not the creepiest thing that happened, but up there. I was in the barn milking as dusk was setting, and I was walking back into the barn and the dogs started to bark. I walked back out of the barn to see, and they started running to a dark SUV which wasn't there 2 seconds before, running with its lights on in front of the barns. I wondered how in the hell the car drove up my driveway without me hearing it or the dogs hearing it. I had just been out there. As they ran to the car, ready to jump on the side and greet somebody, it just vanished. One dog jumped up to put its paws on the side of the car, and fell down as the car just disappeared. The dogs ran around where it had been sitting, and looked at me, confused. I stood there just as confused for a moment. The dogs were unsettled. I said to them, well, that was blip in the matrix, and walked back into the barn. No tire tracks left or any sign that it was there. If the dogs hadn't run around in circles in the place it had been, I would have thought I had been seeing things. I tried telling a few people after that, but they looked at me like I was crazy. I have seen some odder things here, and wonder why. I believe after what I have seen that either none of this is real, this life, or that other dimensions cross into our lives at times. I don't remember this, but it involves me. I would have been maybe a year old. I was asleep in the nursery and my parents were awake in bed, talking before going to sleep. When all of a sudden they heard an adult voice loudly go, "Shh," from the nursery. They both bolted up out of bed and rushed into the nursery to find me awake, but thankfully alone. They never told anyone because who would believe it? There was also an incident with my ma around that same time. My dad had just gotten up at like 5 a.m. to go to work and she was in bed, deciding whether to get up or sleep a bit more. She decided to get up and, as she stepped out of bed, someone reached out from under the bed and grabbed her foot, hard. She immediately pulled herself back up on the bed and was frozen there in fear for some time, waiting for someone to speak, make the bed move, start crawling out from under, whatever. Eventually she flew out the door, grabbed me, and then a weapon. But when she worked up the courage to go back to their room and look, there was of course no one there. Again, my parents never told anyone because it sounds crazy. I tend not to believe in ghosts or spirits, but these are freaky stories. That bed thing. I went to America on holiday with my mom and sister when I was about 9 years old. We went to Disneyland, the LA one, with my aunt and 2 cousins. We stayed in a hotel very near the location. I would always wake up early, and was normally always the first to wake up. We are all sharing a room, aunt and cousins in an interleading room and my mom, sister and myself in our own section from what I remember. My sister and I each had a single bed. I sat up in my bed when I woke up and then noted everyone was still sleeping, important because I accounted for who was there. Then I swiveled myself to the side of the bed to get up, go to the bathroom. As I am about to place my foot on the floor, I swear I saw an arm come out from under the bed. I just leapt like a cat that gets a fright. I landed on my mom's bed and must have shrieked or something because now the room was waking up. Needless to say, nothing was there despite what I swear I saw. There was not even an item of bedding or shirt or anything I could have mistaken for in the dim morning light. Looked like a female arm. The image is still clear in my head today, 20 plus years later. Me and my cross-country team went to Yosemite, about 17 years back now. The girls and boys slept in 2 big separate tents. I didn't know the sleeping accommodations prior to the trip, so my grandma got me a little tent of my own. There were quite a few people in the area, so it's not like we were isolated or anything like that. I never slept well even in my younger years. And quite a few things happened during our 1-week stay. One being a bear walking by my tent, another being the sound of a woman screaming. The girls in the tent heard it too. But one night in particular I heard some splashing and rustling in the lake we were camping by. I figure, it's another bear or some shit. So I get my flashlight to see what it may be. Kinda unsafe idea maybe now that I think of it. I point it in the direction of the sound and I see what looks like a person. But not quite a person. No clothes on, but it was small but not built like a kid. They ran behind the trees. I go immediately back into my tent. Didn't see anything else like that the rest of the trip. When I was about 10 to 12 years old, I was afraid of dark and had trouble sleeping. I was always tired. Sometimes my mom came to my room at night just to check if I was sleeping. One night I was just about to fall asleep when I saw my mom standing next to my window looking out. Except it wasn't my mom. She had short hair and this someone else had long hair. I didn't see their face because it was dark, but when they turned around and looked at me I felt horror I've never felt before. Not because they were somehow horrible, but because I felt a wave of kindness and worrying from them. I suddenly knew they have always been watching. Being a kid, I just hid under my blanket and waited. Nothing happened. And there was no one there when I finally checked. Well, I thought I was hallucinating from being so tired and half asleep, but it happened again. And again. Always different people. They were just checking on me, not wishing anything bad, but one of them was a bit irritated because I could see them. They said, not out loud, I just knew it in my head, that I shouldn't be staying in that room. They were like, it's obviously not good for you to spend night on this route. I changed rooms with my sister later. Not for that reason. I never told a soul. I was not a trusting kid and I was pretty sure everyone would think I was crazy. They never came to that other room. I started to sleep better. Sometimes when I got up at night to have a glass of water of something, I felt this presence being like, see? I told you that was not a place for you. I swear that I'm pretty serious person and do not believe in anything supernatural. But I have no explanation for this. I was trying to sleep on some kind of pathway for spirits, I guess. They didn't bother my sister. Or maybe she just didn't tell anyone either. I was about 6 or 7, in my home with my brother and my dad. We were all doing our own things. My dad was watching TV in the living room, my brother playing in his bedroom, and I was in the kitchen with a coloring book. There is a hallway that connects all 3 of these rooms together, so it wasn't that difficult to reach each other. I was just coloring and eating some candy, I believe, when there was this huge crash in my brother's room. I went to see what had happened, walked past the living room door and into my brother's room. It was empty of my brother, and everything was in place where it should have been. So I went back to the living room to ask my dad what had happened, but he wasn't there either. The house was completely empty, even though I had just walked past my dad, who was sitting in his chair smoking a cigarette. I had checked all of the other rooms in the house for them both, then checked again, so I went outside to the back porch. It was late at night already, but it was so quiet, not even a bug was making any noise. We lived in the country, so it wasn't uncommon to see a few animals up close here and there. But I had never seen anything like this before. It was a white deer, just standing in the middle of the yard, staring in my direction. It was surreal. When I saw that none of the vehicles were gone, I ran back inside to look again. Both my dad and my brother were back, in the living room and bedroom where they first were. I asked my dad where they went and he said he hadn't moved from the living room. My childhood was pretty shitty and I don't remember a lot, but this is something I'll never forget. It scared the hell out of me then and still confuses me now thinking about it. Was at my grandpa-in-law's cemetery. I had just gotten into my first huge ever fight with my husband. His grandpa became my father figure in the short time he was in my life. So I went to his grave and talked to him and told him I was upset and why. I needed help. Our family tradition is to always clean it up, the whole thing. So we bring small plastic shopping bags, or trash bags with us to put the trash in. Well, I'm alone, and I was headed towards a section and I had bent over a solidar's grave and was cleaning it up when I suddenly felt like I was being watched by something evil and negative. I stood up quickly and looked around. Mind you, where his cemetery is, it's nothing but cow fields on 3 out of the 4 sides. So it's open. Well, one side has woods, and goes to a person property. It felt like whatever it was in the woods. There's nothing there, not even a squirrel. I went back to work on the soldier's grave, and I suddenly hear the wind pick up, and something run at me from the woods. I spun around quickly and literally felt someone grabbing my shouldering and telling me everything was going to be okay, and like I was in some force field of a bubble and I was going to keep going, but the voice said, "I can't hold this much longer, you have to get out of here." I am running back to my car at this point, and I get in my car, lock the doors and turn on my Pandora, and it literally glitched down the playlist to turn on Blackpink's song "See You Later." My grandpa-in-law never said goodbye but always "I'll see you later," didn't matter if it was on the phone or in person. I sped home and told my husband. It's never happened again, and outside of one person, and my husband, no one believes me that happened. Never have had weird feelings like that again from the cemetery either. We do still clean it. We just cleaned it up back in October after my Mill's funeral was over. Husband's family thought we were weird, others were saying we were super nice. I was staying at a friend's house one night and was sleeping on the couch. I had a dream where I was camping out in the woods. It was night and I was in a tent sitting underneath a bunch of pine trees and a dark night sky. It was peaceful, but out of the quietness I heard a large creature starting to move around outside of the tent. I stayed still hoping it would go away, but it kept getting closer and finally was standing over my tent. Out of desperation I planned to shine my flashlight at it in hopes it might scare it away, but as soon as I did, it illuminated a silhouette of this giant alien-looking creature that let out this extremely bizarre, terrifying sound and immediately ripped open the door to my tent and started dragging me out and away from my tent. In my panic I woke up shouting and realized I was being pulled off the bottom of the couch by my feet. As soon as I woke up the pulling stopped, but I was already off the couch. It was pitch black, no one was in the room and my friend was dead asleep in the other room. I jumped back up on the couch and covered myself in blankets. I suppose it's possible that I might have thrown myself off, but considering how I went off feet first at such a fast speed, it leaves me wondering. Almost 25 years ago, when I was probably 8, my family moved into this large old house that was probably built in the early 1900s. It was a 2-story, Victorian-style house that had laundry chutes that led to a large concrete basement where the washing machine and dryer were. There was this weird room in the basement that seemed out of place and disturbing. It was a room no larger than a closet, with an old clawfoot tub and shower head and a way to padlock it from the outside but no way to lock it from the inside. I still think about this room and wonder why it was set up like this. The house had a mostly good feeling to it, except for the basement. Eventually, my very superstitious stepmom became so uncomfortable going to the basement to do laundry, that she made my dad convert the mud room to a laundry room so she wouldn't have to go downstairs anymore. Dad thought she was being ridiculous, but he did it anyway. We lived in the house for a few years and at some point the feeling in the house started to shift. Little things started happening, nothing too concerning though. My stepsister eventually started to feel really uncomfortable in her room upstairs. She said she felt like someone was watching her when she slept and she had a hard time sleeping. She started sleeping more during the day on the couch in the living room. Or she would sleep in the room with me. Our cats would act funny. They'd puff up, with pupils full, and stare at seemingly nothing. Just little things that were freaky but nothing too crazy. One day my stepmom took me with her to pick up some lunch for everyone, and when we were driving towards the house, I could vividly see someone wearing all black, like a full-on cape, standing in my stepsister's window watching us. My stepmom saw it too and she freaked out and had my dad and stepbrother search the whole house. They found nothing, thought we were being paranoid and figured we had seen a shadow or something. Eventually, my dad and stepbrother start feeling uneasy in the house too. Sometimes you could hear what sounded like someone walking up the basement stairs and my dad would grab a bat and be ready to confront whoever it was. This sort of thing continued for a while. I've asked my dad about this and he said, man, that house would freak me out. I'd hear those footsteps and I'd grab a flashlight and a bat. I'd puff my chest up, open that door and run down the stairs swinging, ready to kill whatever was there. It got to the point where everyone was on edge in the house. The final straw of us moving was when my stepbrother went to open a window in his room upstairs and both of his arms went straight through the window. The last time I talked to him was a couple years ago, but, even then, he still swears someone pushed him, despite being the only person upstairs. He had to be rushed to the emergency room, where they had to remove huge shards of glass from his arms and stitch him back up. He has gnarly scars from it. We moved from that house and eventually the old lady that owned it sold it. I don't think she could keep tenants for very long, but that's just me speculating. Where the house sat is a car dealership. Supposedly, the house itself was moved from the property and is still somewhere in the town I live in. I've never seen it though and I have no interest in finding it. When I was in 3rd grade, my mom and dad were getting a divorce. We, my mom, younger brother, 3 younger sisters, and I, all moved up to my mom's home state and into a small 2-bedroom trailer out in the countryside. My mom was dealing with some emotional issues and drinking a lot, leaving us home alone most weekend nights. We would always hear scratches on the siding or footsteps outside, but we mostly assumed it was tall weeds or animals wandering around at night. One night it was relatively calm outside, and my mom had gone out drinking, leaving me to take care of my brother and sisters. We all sat in the living room watching movies on tapes. Suddenly we heard the back door open and slam shut. We all stood up, and slowly made our way towards the back half of our trailer. My brother and I stayed ahead of the group and we peeked into the short hallway that led to our bathroom and bedroom. The light was off and we were too scared to walk the few feet into the darkness to flip on the light switch. Being horrible siblings, we tried and failed to force my youngest sister to take a peek. I managed to build up the courage to take a few steps towards the light switch. Then I saw something move. I took a step back and my siblings huddled around me. I held my breath as something took a few steps out of the darkness. It was an alien. It looked like the stereotypical little alien with the big head, oversized eyes, small mouth and small stature. We all screamed and ran to the living room and we heard the door open and slam shut again. We stayed up pretty late that night. After a period of time we went and checked our bedroom and the bathroom didn't see anything. The back door wouldn't lock for some reason or other, so we found some string and tied it to something to try and keep it closed. My mom showed up sometime in the middle of the night and found us all sleeping in the living room. She was pissed at us. I explained why, but of course she didn't believe us. I don't know why, but I'm the only one who remembers seeing what it looked like. Everyone else remembers being scared of something that came inside our home, but they don't remember seeing it. A lot of people don't believe me, so I don't really tell it anymore. When I was about 15 I went to Virginia with my mom and dad to see one of my sisters. She was in the Navy and stationed at Norfolk. She had a baby a few months prior and we went to meet her. Because we were in Virginia and I was fascinated with history, I wanted to visit the historic towns of Jamestown and Williamsburg. So the second day we were there we went to Williamsburg. My sis told us about one of the churches where founding fathers would sit and I wanted to go in. It was very neat and nicely air conditioned. It was 102°/100% humidity lol. After we left the church there were gravestones that my mom and I went to look at. While we were standing there, probably about 2 minutes at that point, I started feeling a tightness around my neck. The tightness kept getting stronger and I was at that point starting to suffocate. I looked at my mom who looked like the wind was knocked out of her. She eventually manages to push me and I grab her and we both manage to break free of whatever it was. After we catch our breaths she notices I have redness around my neck. When she gets a closer look she sees a full handprint. She immediately takes a picture and shows me and it is a handprint, a very large handprint. She proceeds to take a picture with my hand over the handprint and this handprint is so large I can't match it. After my dad and Bill come over and see I have redness around my neck. My dad immediately asks why I have redness on my neck. I tell him but, he doesn't believe me. Not only do I put my hand over the handprint to show him, he does the same and even his hand is smaller. He of course tells me and my mom nothing happened and we proceed to leave. My mom takes a quick snapshot of the graveyard before we do. When we look back at the photos later we notice a silhouette by a tree that was near the gravestone where we're looking at. Mind you, this was all in broad daylight. After a few days we get back home and show my older sis the pics. She believes us she was the only one, my brothers didn't. A day after we settle, my mom downloads the pics on the computer. The next day we went to look at all the pictures, but those pictures of my neck in the graveyard were completely gone. My mom's camera at the time held photos for 2 weeks before they permanently deleted. When we went to look to see the photos on her camera, at the point 6 days later, they are also gone. She tried to download the pics again, but those images were permanently lost. Mom and I only have the memories, but when I tell people, most think it's a made-up ghost story. I can tell you it was real and I'll never forget it. Kingston University, London, 2006. I moved into my university dorms autumn 2005. From the very first day I knew it was going to be a creepy experience. The dorms were partly built on reclaimed land from a huge graveyard, most of which still existed. My dorm room was on the ground floor, built on the old section of the graveyard, no further than 10 feet from the closest headstone. Disturbing things occurred throughout the year. Multiple times my 3 dorm mates and I would bolt out of our bedrooms into the hallway, in the dead of night, after feeling what only can be described as a sickening and foreboding presence standing by our bedside. Room temperatures would plummet, TVs would sporadically turn on and off, and the mattress would even shudder. This all culminated in early June. Everyone had left for the summer. I had stayed an additional week to search for a house. I woke up early one morning to my cell phone ringing. I answered the private number, only to hear static. Confused, I look up to see my bedroom door wide open. This was impossible as my door was sprung and automatically closes. Freaked out, I jump out of bed and put a bag against the door and go into the kitchen to have a drink of water. As I'm walking back into the bedroom, I see 2 child-size handprints that looked as if they had been dipped in coal, dragged down my open door. At this moment I'm filled with the feeling of utter dread. I grab a handful of clothes and my laptop. I rush into the bathroom only to see 2 more handprints, one dragged down the mirror and the other on the adjacent wall. I grab my things and run out of the building half dressed and terrified. I looked at my phone to see that the call I received that woke me up was at 6:06 a.m. The date was June 6, 2006. I swear to God. 3 keys were needed to get into that building and my bedroom. No one was there and no one has ever come forward to say it was a prank. All I do know is that I would never go back to that room alone again. When I was about 15, I had a friend whose grandparents lived in on a farm about 30 minutes out of town. On the edge of the property was the house her grandmother grew up in, which was not in the best shape and had been abandoned. My friend had invited a few of us out to their cabin for a sleepover, and in the early evening we decided to go explore the house as my friend said she had never been inside. The house was locked and most of the windows were boarded up except one, which we used to get in. Inside the house, we found a somewhat unsettling scene. The house looked like the family had just left all their belongings behind and abandoned the house, a book on the couch which was flipped over to hold its spot, dishes in the sink, and even a pot on the stove which had a layer of filth inside, like whatever it had contained had degraded to mush and dried up. The staircase was very rickety and leaning to the left, so we went up one at a time, and I went first. The bedrooms upstairs were similarly abandoned. The wardrobe in one of the bedrooms was open and a moth-eaten dress lay out on the bed. I even found a necklace with a delicate cross pendant on it on the floor by the bed, which I took with me. We were all a little spooked but too curious to leave, until we found the doll. In one of the children's bedrooms right under the window was a small desk with nothing on it but a doll lying on its back in the middle. It was about the size of my hand, with short blonde hair and wide blue eyes. I noticed what looked like a little flap on its chest as it was slightly open, so I opened it all the way, which covered its face. In bright red letters, "Get out." I did not hesitate to obey and shouted to my friends that we needed to leave. I already felt fairly uncomfortable, but when I read the doll's message I felt like I was being watched. We all hurried down the stairs one by one and crawled out the window. Once we had ran past the tree line which surrounded the old house, we stopped and I explained what I saw, and one of my friends said she had seen the message too when I lifted the flap. We didn't tell my friend's grandmother what we did, but apparently she told my friend later that they just transitioned out of living at that house and left a lot of stuff behind, and then boarded it up when they had built their new house, and she hadn't been in the house for over 60 years. I still have the necklace, but I have never worn it as it just reminds me of what happened. I used to live on an old farm where the farmhands' quarters had been made into a rental apartment. We felt a strong and unwelcoming presence in the apartment at night, movements and such too, but the absolute impressive experience was the horse ghost. After living there for some time, the owner renewed the old stables to be rented out for horses. Shortly after, 3 horses took residency there, and not long after we heard it for the first time. At around 8 p.m. we heard a horse walk into the courtyard, We both jumped up and ran out believing a horse had gotten loose. I ran to the stables and my ex ran out to look after the horse. When he rapidly pulled open the door to the stables, I saw 3 shocked horses looking at me with puzzled expressions. My ex hadn't seen anything either, so we shrugged and went back to bed. The day after, it happened again. This time we ran to the windows and looked out from both sides. Nothing. Only the vaguely lit darkness. A couple of days went before we heard it again, and we got used to it and accepted it as it was, the spirit of a horse coming to visit its friends. It kept happening at random through the time we lived there, but always around 8 p.m. Even our neighbor, who was a stern non-spiritual believing mechanic, heard it and totally lost her mind when she found out we heard it too. A while later we learned that the farm had burned down many years ago, and we assumed the poor horse had perished then, and when suddenly new horses arrived it found some new friends. About 2 years ago I had a quite nice and strange job as companion and office manager to a countess who lived in a castle in the country. The castle, built in 1730, was the residence of a very famous noble family. On a lighter note, my dog would never ever enter the small chapel, because of the polished marble floor, I guess, but run around the other parts of the castle very merrily. But in front of the chapel he would growl, raise his hair, turn around. He spooked the tourists completely out with it, every time. After about 3 weeks I felt it for the first time. I never knew what haunted meant, before that particular feeling, never felt this before, anywhere else or after leaving the castle. It is very hard to describe, an alien feeling, and no visible ghosts in it. It came down on me in the dining room, all of a sudden. It was like a heavy, dark cloud spreading over all, like a feeling, something jumping on your breast. It grew heavier, darker and stronger. The longer I stayed there, I could not bear to spend the nights there anymore. Every day I had a very strong feeling of get out of here now. After 6 months I left the job, because of this eerie feeling, with a very heavy heart, because I really liked the old lady. The most terrifying thing for me was to get to know what haunted feels like. And I would not recommend to be too curious about it.